You're watching Autism and the Church, Part 2. My name is Mike Woods. I'm a graduate of Trinity Theological Seminary. I'm a father of 3 boys, triplets, each of them on the autism spectrum. And in Part 2, we're going to talk about the culture of autism. What are some of the unique learning characteristics associated with children on the autism spectrum, and what are the teaching implications that we need to be aware of as pastors and youth leaders and Sunday school teachers in a community of faith? In Part 1, if you haven't watched that yet, I would encourage you to do so. We talked about what are the characteristics of the community of faith that make it a place of welcome for people on the autism spectrum. Culture. Culture refers to the particular characteristics of a group of people. Cultural norms affect the ways that people think, dress, talk, spend their leisure time, and other fundamental aspects of human behavior. So, what are some of the ways that you think, talk, dress, or act based on the cultural norms of your community of faith, of your denomination, of your faith in general? Our Christian culture should influence how we view people with autism and their inclusion into our community of faith. We talked about the characteristics of the Christian culture that should make it a place of inclusion for people with autism in Part 1 of Autism and the Church. Autism as a culture. Autism isn't truly a culture. It's a developmental disability that's caused by neurological dysfunction. However, this dysfunction affects the ways that individuals with autism think, talk, eat, spend their leisure time, and understand their world. Thus, in a sense, autism does function as a culture in that it yields characteristics and patterns of behaviors in individuals with this condition. If we want to include people with autism in our communities of faith, it's important then to gain some understanding about the culture of autism. The term cross-cultural interpreter is becoming more prevalent in our society as more and more people are needed to help those from differing cultures live and work collaboratively with one another, to understand one another, and to become a community with one another. So the role of a special needs ministry for a person with autism is like that of a cross-cultural interpreter. We need people who understand both cultures and are able to translate the customs of the non-autistic environment to the person with autism. In effect, what we attempt to do for people with autism in a special needs ministry is what we ourselves might wish for when we travel to a foreign country. While you might try to learn some of the foreign language, you would also be very glad to have a guide who could help you through the different processes of that culture, such as buying a bus ticket or ordering a meal. You would appreciate a cross-cultural interpreter. So to help develop spiritual growth in a person with autism, it's important to understand their culture and the strengths and the challenges that are associated with it so that you can learn to support them in learning about your culture, the Christian culture. Let's talk about some of the learning challenges associated with the characteristics of the culture of autism. One of those is an excessive focus on details. People with autism are often very good at noticing minute details, particularly visual details. Now, the technical term for this concept is called stimulus over selectivity. But what this concept means is that a person might focus so much on one particular detail or concept that they miss the bigger picture. It's kind of like having a mental tunnel vision. For example, during the video part of your lesson, a person with autism might be so focused on something in the background of the video that he or she totally misses what the video segment was about. Or another example might be that they're so focused on a particular word on a page that they neglect its meaning within the context of the sentence. So what are some implications for teaching? Well, take a hard look at your Sunday school curriculum. Basically, you have three choices. You can keep it like it is, you can simplify it, or you can seek an alternative curriculum. Before considering an alternative curriculum for your special needs learners, I'd consider simplifying the curriculum that you already have. Learners use the same materials as everybody else, but perhaps you break down the activities into smaller steps, or minimize the number of steps that are required. You could consider altering the amount of time that's required to participate. You could simplify the objectives, or emphasize fewer concepts rather than the entire scope of the curriculum. Implementing some of these steps will go a long ways towards helping the person with autism stay focused on the important details of what it is that you're trying to teach. Another learning challenge associated with the culture of autism is distractibility. It can be very difficult for people with autism to pay attention because of their need to focus on something else. People with autism can be distracted by both internal feelings and external things, such as sights and sounds and textures. So what are the teaching implications? Well, there's a couple of strategies that you could use here. One of them that autism-related research reveals is to use teaching materials that have a high degree of interest for the learner. You know, I often say that people with autism are more like you and I than different. And here's a good case in point. I pay a lot more attention to something that I'm interested in than I do when I'm not interested. So does the person with autism. So find or develop materials or activities in conjunction with your curriculum that your learner likes, and he'll be a lot less distracted. Another strategy to improve attention and decrease distractibility is what's known as a sensory diet. Now, there's too much information to cover in this time frame about a sensory diet, but Google it if you want to learn more, or come back later because I intend on doing a future episode on this particular strategy. Another learning characteristic associated with the culture of autism is concrete thinking. People on the autism spectrum tend to be very good concrete thinkers, but for that reason, they can have difficulty with abstract language concepts. Regardless of their cognitive level, people with autism have a relatively greater difficulty with abstract language concepts. In the culture of autism, then, words typically mean one thing. They don't have connotations. So what are the teaching implications for this? Well, you want to use as much straightforward facts and language as possible. Try to stay away from jargon, simplify your language, and use practical examples to help the words make sense. In addition, you can think about using semantic maps, Venn diagrams, and brainstorming charts to help visually depict more abstract sounding concepts, especially like the ones that we use in church, such as resurrection and conversion and a host of other theological concepts. Another learning challenge associated with the culture of autism is in organizing and sequencing. People on the spectrum in general can have difficulty integrating multiple pieces of information. The term often used is executive functioning. And executive functioning is a term to describe a set of mental processes that help us to bring different pieces of information together, organize them, and now use that organized information to act on our environment. This process manifests itself in our ability to plan a project, finish work on time, multitasking or focusing on several things at one time. So what are the teaching implications? Well, here are a few research-based strategies that can be used in a community of faith to minimize the organizing and sequencing difficulties. You can use a visual schedule. Consider creating to-do lists or use checklists to identify what materials may be needed. And then break down tasks into smaller, more clearly identifiable steps, such as teaching the order of a worship service, one component or one step at a time, and then moving on to the next step once the first one's learned. Also consider using video modeling as a tool to teach church-related sequences. And the advantage of video modeling is you can send that video home And your learner can watch that in the convenience of their home to learn better the aspects of your community of faith. The last learning characteristic that I want to talk about is generalizing. And generalizing basically means being able to transfer skills across different people and environments. Well, on the autism spectrum, a lot of our learners have difficulty transferring skills and behaviors across places and or people. People with autism often learn skills or behaviors in one situation, but may have difficulty generalizing that skill or behavior to a different situation or a different person. Sometimes a lack of being able to generalize is tied into the first thing that we talked about, stimulus over selectivity, or overly focusing on details. Some teaching implications for this is you want to observe your learner in each and every facet of the activities in your community of faith. Can he or she do things in youth group that you see him or her do in the classroom? Can the learner sit as well in the worship service as he or she does in the Sunday school classroom? Can your learner do the things in your classroom that you know that he or she can do in their home? You want to identify those skills that are not transferring from one environment to another or one person to another. Then you want to prioritize those skills and then begin to address them one by one. Well, that's our time for today. I want to thank you for taking the time to listen. Join me next week when we talk about a different topic. And until then, God bless you and have a great week.